Zoom fatigue is real, right? Um, and I think that from the student's perspective, right? And I talk to my students, because again, I didn't spend a lot of time teaching synchronously, face to face. I spent a lot of time having conversations with my students and asking them how they're doing. And so some of them are like, my anxiety is really high. I don't know how to process through this. I'm really depressed. Not being able to see my friends or even being engaged in the classroom is really hard. Right? My parents are losing our apartment. I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I don't have private space to watch my lectures, and I don't have headphones.
What's up, family? Brandon here with the Solutionary Experiment. Please make sure you hit the like button, you subscribe, you hit that notification, all that good stuff. This is the long-awaited part 2 of my very important discussion with Dr. Lillian. It's a little long. I should have broken this up, but I want to just give you all the rest of this goodness all at once. So take it in chunks, digest it, but please enjoy and listen closely. So let's talk about funding for schools. Have you seen in this new, it hasn't been passed yet, but this new bill that they're proposing, that 1.7 billion of it for this virus bill is going to include funding for a new FBI building?
I heard that yesterday, actually. I didn't see it, but I heard about that. So I'm just like,
how insane is that? I
when
mean,
you
we're literally in the middle of a pandemic right now.
Yeah.
You know, we want to open up schools. We're already starting to see now that you have, small children who are contracting this. And what drives me crazy is we see a situation where we see folks thinking so narrow, like, okay, well, they're children, they're going to get over it, they're going to be fine. I mean, you taught, you taught in the public school system. How many, what percentage of your students, probably saw their grandparents or not? You don't have to go to your grandparents. You've got just their parents who may have, pre-existing conditions and whatnot.
Yes.
And I don't even know if one point, if they said, all right, we came to our senses, we don't need a new FBI building. We're going to put all this money into making sure our schools are safe and secure if we open up. I mean, is that even close to being enough? I don't know. I mean, it's insane.
It's not. Well, and I think so. The FBI building thing, I think, is interesting and almost laughable, and I find it fascinating that the GOP, there's a group of folks from the Republican Party who are like, what?
Right.
No. Right? So I'm like, okay, good for you, you got that, right? But I think that what we have to, the way in which people are thinking about education, this is the DeVos model, right? It's a business. Education is not a business. It's an investment in our country. And you're not going to see, if we talk about education in terms of ROI, like immediate, right, we're doing the wrong thing. We're doing the wrong, and it's an ROI in terms of, okay, here's the money that you will earn, right? And I'm just like, that's only part of what we do as educators. Right? Yes, we want our students to be able to live happy, healthy lives that are comfortable. That's what we all want, right? But we're also like, but that shouldn't be the only measure, right? We're not only trying to get our students that $100,000 job at Facebook or whatever, right? That's not our primary goal, because if their $100,000 job at Facebook doesn't make them feel like they have to contribute to society, where are we going to go? Right? So it's not enough money there, and money is hard, right? And it's, I don't even know how to kind of go about this, because I know that I've been blessed in terms of being able to figure things out and live the way that I live. But I also know that, and I guess that's my privilege, right? I don't see money as the most important thing in my life because I don't have to struggle for it anymore. Right. And even when I had to struggle for it, I was just like, it'll be okay. this kind of very, this attitude of it'll come. I'll just figure it out. And it worked for me, but that doesn't work for everybody. But there's got to be there needs to be more money in social services. There needs to be more money in education. There needs to be more money in things that will help our community heal, not only in these short-term kind of matters, but in the long term. We have to take care of our veterans. PTSD is a thing. We have to take care of our youth who are in these spaces that have been gentrified and then, taken out from underneath them, and, that they're mourning their loss of their spaces. I think about San Francisco and how the Black community in San Francisco has been, everybody's moved out. I can't even articulate, right, the way in which our demographics have shifted so completely because of gentrification. And what I think will be really interesting to watch is how that is going to shift again because of all these tech companies saying, well, we're going to go remote from now on because that's probably the best thing to do. So a lot of folks who were in San Francisco before are like, I'm going to go live in Wyoming. It's cheaper, but I'll still be paid California salary. So
I didn't even think about that. That's insane.
Right? So I'm just like, yeah. So
let's talk about remote learning or remote teaching from like your point of view, because it sounds like you finish out the previous school year having to teach virtually, and sounds like obviously there were some challenges with probably getting everyone computers and whatnot. So now you guys have got it all together. You got it all figured out.
That's funny, but yeah. That's a thought, right? That's like equitable education. Sorry. Yes.
So let's just pretend everyone's got their laptops now.
Okay.
And they're all good to go.
Mm-hmm.
What are some challenges with teaching virtually?
From the student perspective or the teacher's perspective?
From the teacher perspective first.
Okay. Okay, is everybody here? Can you access the learning management software? Okay, were you able to look at this? Did you read this before we were in this dialogue now? Okay, it looks like we lost somebody. I think their internet is bad. Hold on. Okay, let's wait, because they were saying something interesting. Hold on. Like, basically what I'm saying is what I lose. And I'm not, I did not sign up to teach online. Right. And I've been resisting that. And I know that because my thing is the interaction in the classroom is so vital to that learning process and that process of becoming a learner. Right. And the remote teaching for me, what it ended up being is I'm throwing up my lectures written, and then I recorded my audio. So I read it out loud to my students. And then, that becomes transactional, right? That part became transactional. Then I spent the rest of my time meeting with students one-on-one, via Zoom, via text, via Google Meet, via whatever, via phone.
That's an incredible amount of time.
Yes.
And dedication.
Yes, it did. And there were teachers who were just like, peace, I can't do this. You know what I mean? Across the board. There were teachers who were just like, yeah, it's a whole lot of nope. Hasta. There was a junior college in California who were just like, yeah, we're just gonna end the semester now. Yeah. It's when we went on lockdown.
Like if the students have already paid for that semester and whatnot, I mean, what did that look like? What happens there?
So in terms of grades, right? A grading process still goes through. It's not like they lost their grades, right? It was what they lost was the opportunity to learn. So students who are just like, okay, my teacher bounced, but I still got an A. I'm good. We call it pandemic grading. And I talk to my students about that very clearly. I'm just like, look, I'm adjusting what our assignments look like. I'm
Mm-hmm.
adjusting what my expectations are. I'm being very clear with you about this because I know, right, that this is going to have far more severe impacts on you in other ways. And so I'm trying to, while I expect you to learn some of this, right, most of it, hopefully, right, I also recognize that you're not going to be spending, I hope that you're not spending all day online watching Zoom meetings and videos, etc., because that's overload, right? I mean, Zoom fatigue is real, right? Um, and I think that from the student's perspective, right? And I talk to my students, because again, I didn't spend a lot of time teaching synchronously, face to face. I spent a lot of time having conversations with my students and asking them how they're doing. And so some of them are like, my anxiety is really high. I
Mm.
don't know how to process through this. I'm really depressed. Not being able to see my friends or even being engaged in the classroom is really hard. Right? My parents are losing our apartment. I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I don't have private space to watch my lectures, and I don't have headphones. Right? And so I can't listen without everybody else listening. Right? That's not everybody had that experience. Some people had a dedicated space, had their own computer, had their whole setup, and that's
Right.
great. But not all our students, and that was the hard thing.
So
There's
you're
only so much
literally
that we
like
can do.
wearing a different hat. I mean, you're literally, I mean, you're so many different things you're not just focused
No.
on your lecture and going out. I mean,
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
you're providing them, all kinds of support
Yeah.
and wearing
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
many different hats. And I don't think that
Yeah.
a lot of times the average one of us, probably the
Mhm.
parents, don't even realize it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do have to say that I'm weird in that, maybe not weird. But there are professors who are just like, okay, here's my lecture, go. And really have that distance from their students. Like, I am this scholar, I am this.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also, it's also understandable, because it's like, look, folks got families too. Right? It's like, I've got my kids who I'm trying to teach while I'm lecturing here and managing X, Y, and Z. My spouse is losing their job. The mortgage note is due. All this other kind of stuff, right? So I understand that too. Again, I feel like I'm in a place where I was able to provide that sort of support for
Mm-hmm.
students, and I recognize that not all of my colleagues have that space in their lives. But really, I mean, from when I started as a K-12 teacher, I knew that being a teacher wasn't just, here's the delivery of the content. It was being a nurse, being a therapist, being mom, being all these different things, right? It's like being the one who brings a toothbrush because they don't have one at home. Things like that, right? And so I knew that when I stepped into this, that this is going to be more demanding, far more demanding than face-to-face was. And for me, that caused a lot of anxiety. That caused a lot of kind of questioning. Am I doing the right thing? And I talked to my therapist about this, and I say that freely because one of the things that we need to do is normalize mental health, right? And
Mm-hmm.
tell our
I
students,
agree.
particularly our students of color, right? Our immigrant students, our students who are coming from lower class incomes, that mental health is a thing, and we need to address it, right? We need to be able to address it, right?
Because I know in
And
my community,
yeah.
we look at
Mhm.
mental health as a sign of weakness.
Yes, yes. And
You don't,
yeah.
it's like, hey, suck it up. You
Hmm.
gotta deal
Hmm.
with it.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so yeah,
Or
no,
yeah.
you don't
Yeah.
really even have an outlet to,
Hmm.
even talk about it. We don't even talk about the
Right.
financial aspect of,
Hmm.
getting the assistance you need. So
Yes. Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
so
But it's, yeah.
your college, the whole entire first semester, just off. You're doing it
Uh,
virtually.
yes, yes.
Okay.
And there are some um, districts who have already um, announced that they're doing the entire academic year online. Not we haven't heard anything from our district yet, but there are some that I know that have already said, nope, academic 2020, 2021 is going to be fully online. And that's going to impact a lot of things. It's going to impact enrollment. It's going to impact retention. It's going to impact services. It's going to impact, it becomes a question of, is it okay to tell a student to take a gap year? But then how do you make sure that they feel comfortable that they can come back? How do you facilitate that? Right. And so all these other kinds of, especially if they're like, they did 1 year of college already. It's like, I don't know. And I've heard this from a lot of students. I don't know if I want to come back. What if I have a job that pays the rent and makes me comfortable at Amazon, FedEx, whatever? Why would I go back? Right.
Yeah, I personally was there. I went to Chabot.
Okay.
Immediately after finishing high school, my mother threatened me and told me, she watches this. Oh, well, yeah, it's the truth. But she threatened me and told me, she said, if you do not, after I graduated from high school, if you do not go to college, you cannot be here. And I'm like, okay. So I went.
Right.
And I wasn't really interested in going to college.
Right.
And I got like B's and C's. I just was just kind of just there. It was a mediocre experience. And then after about a year of it, I said, I guess I'm gonna have to move out there because I'm not in the right headspace to even want to be in college.
Right.
So of course she softened her stance, and I started working full time and paying rent and doing that. And I started to kind of climb this ladder where I was making pretty good money.
Yeah.
And I had a boss who said, all right, you've hit your peak. You've hit your ceiling. Financially, you're not going to make any more money. And at that time, this is, early 90s. I'm making, I think, $60,000 a year. I'm feeling pretty good.
Early 90s?
Yeah. I'm feeling good. But she's like, look, you can double that and then some. You got to get your degree. You got to finish.
Yeah.
And so at that point, my motivation was obviously financial. But when I did go back, because I think at that point I was 24. So when I did go back, it was completely different.
Yes.
I was smashing it, getting A's the whole night. Like, I think I finally, like a year in, I think the second year, I got an A- on something, and I was sick. I was so upset about that. But I really took it seriously. And like she said, and once I got, shortly after I graduated from college, all of a sudden this whole other world opened up to me.
Yeah.
And, all kinds of other opportunities, were available for me that weren't there at all.
Yeah.
And then being the rebel in me, I don't have a problem with taking direction or guidance or anything like that at all. Right. But I'm kind of a free thinker. There's a lot of, I'm constantly always challenging different things. And I think I started to get kind of bored with the corporate world, although it was great money.
Yeah.
And I decided, well, I'm going to open up a business. And I buy this window cleaning franchise. Mind you, I'm afraid of heights.
Interesting choice of investment.
Yeah.
Awesome, though.
But, I got my degree in business management. And so there's a lot of things from a business perspective that I was able to kind of put into that. But then you get crazy things happening like 9/11 and whatnot. And just, because what I was doing was literally a luxury for people. And so then what happens is I'm out of like the normal corporate space for so long that people didn't even care about my education anymore.
Right.
Because it's my work experience, running my own business for like 5 years. I had been so removed from the tech, sector for so long that I almost felt like I had to go back and try and, relearn some things. Right. But, we're in a space right now where personally feel like, this is just my opinion,
Hmm.
that I think that depending on what your career path is and what it is
Hmm.
that you're doing,
Right.
I definitely think people still should learn. I don't think you should
Hmm.
just haphazardly just jump into anything. Even
Hmm.
if you're like, hey, you know what? I want to be 100% YouTube vlogger and this is all
Hmm.
I want to
Hmm.
do. There's
Hmm.
still a number of things that you need to educate yourself about before you
Yeah.
jump into
Right.
that and do that. But,
Right.
um, I see right now where people are doing craziness where it's like, oh, I'm just going to get a degree in anything just to say I
Hmm.
have a piece of paper and just
Hmm.
to say I have a degree, and I'm
Right.
going to make it. I'm going to
Mhm.
immediately, start making six figures and whatnot.
Ah.
And
Sorry.
it's just,
Yeah.
it's not realistic at
It's not.
all.
It's not.
Um, but anyway, I'm start going all over the place. Let's
It's
finish up
okay. Yeah.
this college
Oh,
and COVID
well,
pandemic.
well, do you want me to talk about the ROI thing, or do you want to
You know
first,
what?
or?
I've opened up a can of worms. Let's go ahead and finish up the ROI
And
thing.
no, and I think what you did was the smart thing, right? You went for a minute, under threat from your mom. Hi, mom. um, but you realized, this isn't it for me right now. But then when you went back, that's when you killed it, right? And so when
Right.
I talk to students who are older, right, who are 24, 25, 26, who are coming back, there, and I had one student this past year, he's like, I've been out for 10 years, and there's a different sort of anxiety with
Hmm.
that. It's like, oh, I'm older, oh, I should know this already, oh,
Right.
this student who's 4 years younger than me is killing it and I'm not, right? So there's that, right? But what I found with students who are older and who've had world experience, they're far more inquisitive, and there's more purpose, right? It's like, okay, I know why I'm here, right? Because so one of the things that I teach is college success, and one of the things that I harp on with my students is why are you here? What is it that you want to accomplish, right? And it starts with the, oh, I want to make six figures and work at Genentech or what, or Facebook or whatever, right? And I'm just like, okay, that's a good place to start. What does that mean to you, right? And so I've seen it. Like I've seen students who wrestle with the fact that it's like, I realize that I'm not really good at computers, but I'm really good at working with kids, and I'm okay with being in education. Right? And this goes back to the whole thing of like the devaluation of education, right? So
Right.
it's that thing of, you need to know your why, right? 80% of people who come out of college do not do the thing they do with their degree. Their degree largely has nothing to do with what they're, it's like, and that's okay, right? Because yeah, it's that piece of paper. At least get that piece of paper. I absolutely agree with what your boss told you, that piece of paper is going to open doors, right? But where the shift is what are you going to do with the knowledge that you gained, right? Yeah, it can just be a piece of paper. If that's all you want it to be, that's up to you. My hope is always, okay, it's a piece of paper, but
Hmm.
what is the understanding and the learning that got you to it? And how does that continue to impact your life? And it sounds like, you know, you got your degree, you've been able to apply the things that you learned in different ways. And that's the other part of transformational learning, being able to transition the basic skills and the skills that you've cultivated in school into other spaces, right? And not feeling like, okay, well, I majored in this and I can only do this.
Right.
Crap, I'm screwed, right? Because that's not always the case. But I feel like our education system is actually cultivating that. You go on this career path, you go on this particular degree program, and then it's just like, I don't know what I'm gonna do if I don't do this.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference between transactional versus transformational again. And thinking about, how do we value education, everything that we learn, right? It's that spark. What is the thing that made you excited, that got you that A, right? All those A's, what was it about those classes that excited you and has brought you to this point where you're doing this vlog and talking to all these different people, right? And I think that's amazing. So
So
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit more about the
Yeah.
cost of school, because
Yes.
I was
Yes.
looking at a chart,
Mm-hmm.
and you take the value of the dollar today,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
you equate it to 85, 86.
Mm-hmm.
The cost to go to college,
Right.
whether you're talking private institutions or
Mm-hmm.
community colleges and whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
across the board, it is doubled. Why?
Um, inflation. I don't understand economics, but every 10 years, right, the value of things go up or double, right? But I also look at one of the
I'm
questions
even
you asked.
talking, but I'm even talking though, like if you took like, what the value of the dollar
Hmm.
was, like
Hmm.
I'm including inflation.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
when you look at that, it is ridiculously
Right.
expensive. Now
So
I'm gonna say something crazy.
yeah. Yeah.
I have I was listening to someone, a gentleman
Hmm.
by the name of Peter Schiff. I don't know if
Hmm.
I've heard of him. He's an economist and a financial advisor.
Hmm.
He's got his own YouTube space. I don't even know why I'm plugging this guy, but at any rate,
Uh-huh.
he said something that blew my mind. He
Hmm.
says the reason that college has skyrocketed is
Hmm.
because the government got into providing loans. That
Well.
colleges, he says that basically in
Hmm.
the late 60s, that
Hmm.
once colleges started getting into providing, loans, that
Hmm.
the institutions, the universities said, oh, well,
Hmm.
everyone's got all this money now. We're just going to
Mm.
start slowly but surely just ratcheting up the price. You say no to that. Why?
No. Okay. So that's interesting. Um, so college in California used to be free, right? Up until the 80s, because the state saw it as an investment in its people to have an educated working community, right?
Right.
That all changed with the change of taxation and all that other kind of stuff. And where the loan thing, I don't think it's just because if you think about the GI Bill, right? If you think about,
Mm-hmm.
there have been ways that the government has supplemented education in different ways. The loans, I don't even know where to go with that, but I actually believe one of the things that we have to look at is how do we understand the college experience, right? Um, and so one of the questions you actually sent to me was about tuition, right? And I've been
Mm-hmm.
thinking about this in terms of, there are two things that happen with tuition, right? One, you have the tuition for the education, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's paying for, the building space, the teacher salary, the development of curriculum, blah, blah, blah. Then you have fees, student
Mm-hmm.
fees, activity fee, gym fees, da 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 da. Those have risen exponentially, right? If you look at the dorm experience, right,
Mm-hmm.
the amount that people pay, and I didn't look this part up, but the amount that people pay per quarter, per semester has risen exponentially, but has risen exponentially because the expectation of what a dorm experience should be. Should you have a flat screen TV? Should you have these amazing common spaces that have cushy papa sans?
Oh, geez.
So you have to kind of think about it in that way too, because when I went to college in the mid 90s, right, it's like, here's your bed, that's a metal frame, all right, one mattress, you got this very utilitarian desk, right, and that's it. And that was back in 1994. That was like
Right.
4,000 a quarter, right? Included a meal plan, right? Meal plan separate now, right? So thinking about where those increases are now, right? As far as community colleges are concerned, yes, units used to be, what was it, $6 a unit, right? Now it's up to 46,
Yeah,
right?
it's
So one
ridiculous.
class is 150 versus 1,000 at a 4-year institution, right? And within the California state system, there are still fees, I mean, waivers that students can apply for to even get that 150 waived, right? So, I mean, I think that lots of grants and things like that. So the other part of it too is, as a student, how are you being smart about getting into college and managing that finance, right? And again, one of the things that we are missing from our educational process is helping our students understand how to be financially literate, right? Because for a lot of us who went to school in the 90s, one of the biggest things that really got us into debt were those credit card companies that were hanging out in this, in the student lounge, and I was like, hey, not free money, but you felt like it was free money. It's like, oh, I can get that Xbox, right?
See, it's interesting you say that, because I actually plan on bringing it up, but I actually think that you should teach financial literacy not in college, in high school.
Oh yeah.
I think that I took trigonometry. I can't tell you the last time I've used it.
I don't understand theorems and geometry was just like, I think I got a D in that class for a very good reason. I'm just like, I couldn't see the point of it, right? But if I think about what the purpose or how it could be related to now, it did make me critically think about a process, right? So I agree with that. Grand, yeah. So, but yeah, math is not my thing.
But I really think that in high school they should spend a lot more time on civics. I think you would have people, young adults, more civically engaged if they really understood that. I tell my daughter, who's 26 now, I'm like, look, you can't let old people older than me control your future. Right. You and your generation, you need to be out there and be involved. And it's got to be, look, I'm all with the peaceful protesting. I don't have any problems with that, but you've got to be more civically involved. So I think that civics needs to be taught more in high school. But I also think that, teaching them financial, and again, this goes back to redlining and your experiences and whatnot, because I know for me, with some of my white friends who were a little bit more affluent, they were taught about like their parents were trying to, continue on their legacy.
Yes. Generational wealth, right?
Right.
It's generational wealth.
My parents didn't own a home. I grew up in an apartment complex, and we rented. Now, my parents did the best that that they could, but I didn't grow up like that at all. Right. And then when I do go by, and I'm doing good, but all of a sudden, then I start getting this buzz like, oh, I want to start a business, and I want to refinance my home. I refinance at a time where we got this whole subprime lending fiasco going on. And I honestly think that's a big part of the reason why I am no longer in California and why I'm here. Right. Because what that did to my mortgage was absolutely nuts. But that
targeted communities of color. I'm just and low income. Right. Go on. Yeah.
And the thing is that, and it targeted, communities of color, even when they had the credit score to not even have to go get those sort of loans. But if we didn't have this craziness with redlining and whatnot, and my parents had an opportunity, because I always talk to people. Everyone always tells me, well, slavery ended long time ago, and I'm like, look. So we had a period from 1865 to 1968, and I'm like, I start talking to people about the Reconstruction era and whatnot, and how short-lived that was. If we had really been allowed to, be viewed as true citizens, with equal standing. My life, my whole trajectory, everything about my experience would have been completely different. I would have had parents who I was talking to a couple who I DJ'd their wedding, and after the wedding, she was like, well, I wanted to, I was looking at buying a house, and the real estate agent was asking me, well, can't you just like borrow like $50,000 from your parents? And she was like, what are you talking about? Borrowing $50,000. Like, a lot of my clients do that. And the thing is that people don't understand it. When you have generational wealth, you've got parents who can be like, oh, well, I'm going to put $30,000 on your wedding. And, after your wedding, I'm going to give you $50,000. I'm going to loan you $50,000 to,
Yep.
and, for,
Yep.
depending on the community and whatnot, I
Yep.
this is such a complex discussion
It is.
that there's really no simple answer to, because you
Isn't.
almost have
Right.
to dismantle the system and go
Yes.
all the way back to square one.
Yes.
And you're going to have to really disrupt everything that people were thinking about. And so for me, like, I get so frustrated when I see people so focused on, oh, I'm going to tear down this statue. I want to paint Black Lives Matter on the street. I'm like, look, guys, like, that's all fine and well, but that's so minuscule compared to what we really need to be focusing on. There is really huge, big picture, systemic stuff that needs to be attacked and dismantled. And
I think that there's, I've been thinking about this a lot too, right? And I never called myself an activist, but I do consider myself an organizer. And my thing has always been kind of thinking about, there's the short game and the long game.
Right.
Which game are you playing, right? And there's a moment in your life where you play the short game, and where it's important to be at the protest, paint the streets, take down statues, all that stuff. That's kind of like in this angry kind of process, right? And I think for a lot of people, that's an important moment where they become awakened to the injustices and the systemic changes that need to be happening, right? The next part, the long game, that's where it becomes a little dicey, because it's like, okay, are you willing to be in the long game? If so, how are you going to do that? In what way are you going to do that? How are you going to show up in the long game? And are you okay with folks who are in the short game chastising you for not kind of being in the same space that they are, but you are comfortable with the fact that you are doing what you are doing, right? And I think that's, for me, I think about that a lot, because I see a lot of my friends out and protesting and doing all these things, and I think it's amazing and wonderful. But I'm sitting here going, look, I live in a household where I higher potential for someone to get COVID. I'm not going to go out there, right? I'm wearing a mask, 20-second hand wash, all that good stuff, right? Limiting the amount of time I spend outside, which really is hard. But I think that we need to be cognizant and conscious about how we are treating each other in this work too. You know what I mean? Because all the work that we are engaging in is important, right? And moving toward that process of systemic change, right? At least that's the hope, right? And if we look at Representative John Lewis, who just passed away, rest in power,
right?
And that is, if we were to ask ourselves, what does the long game look like? That is, his life was the long game, and we have to ask ourselves, are we willing and capable of doing that for ourselves? And that requires consciousness, and I think I'd love to see more people get out of their heads in the short game and move into the long game. But I've seen way too many people who stay in the short game, get angry, and then drop out and be like, I'm just gonna live my life. I'm good. I've done my part.
It's tough because what we see going on right now is it's a leaderless movement, and there's good and bad with that. Like, say for instance, with the civil rights movement, when Dr. King was assassinated, because that was for the average person, that was the leader in their eyes, although there were multiple a multitude of people who were involved. But it's almost like once he was assassinated, that whole movement kind of disbanded. It's like, all right, well, civil, LBJ signed the Civil Rights Act, and we're good. We, everything's done. We're good. And there was, we just weren't, clearly we weren't. I mean, but based upon what we're still seeing right now, clearly we weren't.
Well, and that's part of the problem, right? It's like when we hang our hats on singular personifications of a movement, right? Because we know that civil rights work continued after Martin Luther King, right? We know that continued to happen after the 1964 civil rights legislation, right? There was still movement toward the work of that, but that largely becomes unsung because I call it the unsexy work, right? The unsexy work of organizing. And on the most part, folks don't want to do the unsexy work, the phone banking, the conversations in their families, the creation of flyers and going to educate and bringing people to educational dialogues, that's the ugly and sexy work, right? Working at the polls during voting, right? These are the things that people can be doing and continue in that work, right? Demanding that their local representatives ensure that there are enough polling places, right, for all of the citizenry, so that they're not driving 50, 100 miles away, Georgia.
Yes.
And that is part of coming back to education. It's like, how do we know how and when to advocate for that if we are not feeling empowered from the get-go, right? And feeling like we can talk about things like money, like civic engagement, like being involved in politics and representation, right? And all of that comes back to this educational process that has been working against so many communities in order to maintain a structure, right, that maintains super white supremacy. Let's say it, right? And folks will say, well, you're racist. I'm like, well, if we think about white as another name for power, right? And the power structure that exists. Because when I talk about race in my immigration history class, right, we're going to talk about whiteness, but we need to understand it in the context of power and what the idea of white and the personification of white, what is that relationship to the idea of power, and how all of us in this country have fed into that in some way or another, right? And it's a huge process, right? That I think a lot of folks are just feeling like, okay, where do we start? But if we recognize that we've already started, right? And it becomes the question of, where are you going to jump in?
I really think I personally think that we're in the midst of a revolution right now. And I don't think that a lot of people are even recognizing it at all. Where this ends up, I don't know. It's funny. Yeah, you talk about whiteness. And so I know that in both of our communities, the standard of beauty, the more European that you look, the more beautiful you are. And there's all kinds of other things that are associated with that. And it's sad. I know that one in certain countries in Africa, bleaching creams are massive. I mean, it's just it's a huge business. And it's sad that, we all hold this, particular standard of beauty. And it's not that Europeans aren't beautiful, but, why can't indigenous people or whatever, however you show up in the world, why can't that be viewed as beautiful as well? And it's really sad. I definitely, I don't see it happening in our lifetime, but we are definitely slowly but surely pushing against all of these sort of norms and these systems. But oh God, I've just got this crazy question. Go ahead.
No, it's interesting because if we think about, there is a slow shift that is happening. People are talking about colorism. People are talking about this, whitening cream and notions, standards of beauty. And if we think about okay, well, why can't we do this? We come from a culture and history that has been guided by magazines like Vogue, right, and that have and fashion houses that have determined what beauty and beautiful is, right? And the people who have the power to change those things, are they willing to do it? Right? If we think about casting in Hollywood, who is in the casting chair? Right? I was reading a couple of posts from my friend who's in theater in LA, and he's just like, look, over 90% of the casting directors are still white. The people who are making decisions are white. And so thinking about, well, how do you dismantle that, right? Without it becoming this, oh, well, you got this job because of affirmative action. Because that's where it's going to go, right? Folks are going to say, oh, well, you just got this because you were Black, because you're Asian, because you're Latino, and we needed representation. And it's kind of like, well, let's talk about the fact that first, I'm qualified. Because affirmative action was never about you not being qualified. It was one of those things.
Thank you for saying that.
Right? It was one of those things that was trying to move the needle toward equity,
right?
And representation. And I'm just like, because one of the biggest affirmative action programs out there, legacy athletics. I'm just saying, and I'm like, yeah. and it may be weird that I'm laughing a lot, and I know that I do this, right? I'm laughing a lot when you're interviewing me, because I feel like this is one of the ways in which I'm able to kind of manage like the what comes up because of this, right? It's not meant to diffuse the importance of what we're talking about, but really it's right. I can either be angry, or I can deliver it in a way that is like, okay, I should look into this more. And she's kind of laughing. So I'm just like, okay, if that's what's gonna make it happen, let's do that. So
no. I know exactly where you're coming from, and I trust me, don't even worry. But for anyone who's watching, appreciate you breaking that down. Yeah. Let's talk about, because we talked a little bit about college being free at one point in California.
Yes.
Thoughts on Bernie Sanders, or even the very progressive side of things, where folks are saying, hey, forgive student loan debt, free college going forward.
Right.
Is that feasible? How do we go about doing that? Does that devalue a college education if we were able to walk down that path and make that happen?
It's interesting to think about it in terms of devaluing education. I think that's a cultural conversation, right? In terms of how is college discussed in the home, right? And if it's discussed in the home as a positive thing, as something that is helpful, then yeah, it's like free or not. Because because my dad served in the Navy for 20 years, my undergraduate education was paid for, right? And I didn't waste it. I spent a little more time than I was supposed to, but because I knew that my tuition was waived, right? But it's like, I think that's where it starts. But if you start with, oh, it's really expensive. Oh, we don't know if we can afford that. You can just go work at X, Y, or Z. You don't need a degree. If that narrative is what is playing in your head, then the opportunity of college is like, then I don't need it, right?
Right.
But if it's that, oh, well, it will help you build your generational wealth. Oh, it will help you get into higher positions of power where you can make change. Oh, it will help you understand or help you develop a greater sense of civic responsibility and engagement, right? And that's a different narrative, right? And so I think that that's where the change needs to start first. The second part is, we need to think about the perception of college too, right? Is it hard, right? It's like, is it the ivory tower? You have all these professors in smoking jackets with like patches on their pipes and like in leather chairs, like expounding on something, right? To a large degree, academia is still largely white and male, right? And now old. Sorry, not trying to be ageist. That's just the real thing, right? If we look at the statistics of who's still in tenured positions, right? It's predominantly white, predominantly male, and aging, right? And what I find very interesting right now that I think about it is that as higher education is moving in this different direction, the number of tenured positions is actually going down, which means as we are diversifying academia and more people of color are coming into professorships, they're not finding themselves in these tenured positions. I'm like, oh, was that a long game thing? Why are we giving, why? Because being tenured is security. Being tenured means that you can say things that, might be controversial and, and engage a different dialogue, right? Than if you weren't. And like I am super blessed to be where I am, but I also know I fought for my position. I applied for my position too. And it's the only one of its kind in the United States. And some people be like, well, why is that? But that's another story. But I think that there is a level of power and Spider-Man responsibility that comes with being a tenured professor, right? And there should be more folks who are engaged in the community doing this work, right? And not making academia feel like this and so high above what is possible, right? And I just got to share this real quick. I am so excited and elated that one of my former students is now looking at the path toward PhD. I cannot tell you how excited I am about that. I've got students who've gone for their masters already, and I'm just like, because I'm sitting here going, what that means that those people will be able to make change and they will be able to become power brokers in wherever they are, and that is the power of education, right?
You're just making your, it's probably, I know it's crazy for you to think, but you can't even really quantify the mark that you're making on each of those students, because there's probably so many. I know for myself, I mean, you got me thinking, I'm like, man, there's probably less than a handful of teachers though, that really early on, like even like in fourth grade, that set me on this trajectory that I'm on right now. Right. And if they're still around, I'm like, man, I need to find these people and let them know. Cause I'm quite sure I've been out of school so long. Yeah. I've been out of school so long. Yeah.
No, and it's funny because my husband says the same thing. And we actually met up with one of his former coaches from high school when we went on vacation. I was just like, and it was funny to kind of sit and listen and hear them reminisce together. And I could see how impactful he was for my husband. I was just like, dang, that's amazing, And yeah, I don't know, but that's the long game, right? I don't have to know. I just believe that my students who have come through my classes, or I hope that the students who have come through my classes are working to try to make this a better place, not just for themselves, but for other folks too,
So I'll end on this with one last question, and it might be a doozy for you.
Yes.
What are some things that, for those of us who are civically engaged, and I think we all should be, but, of our elected officials and whatnot, how, what are some things that, the average citizen should be saying to folks? But even though I don't have a child anymore that's, she's graduated from college, she's obviously, she's out of public school system, but I still feel, as a tax-paying citizen that, I should have a voice in what is happening in education in my city. Yeah. But who should, and I'll be honest with you. I'm the first to tell you, I never went to PTA meetings. I never sat with the school board, but, what are some things that the average citizen should really be thinking about, when they go into the voting booth, or when they're even, or when these people are elected, what are the things that they should be doing, meetings they should be attending and whatnot?
Okay. Hold on. So I don't remember, or I don't forget. It's a heavy list, right? And I think a lot of folks get overwhelmed. So I'm going to start at home. for families. If you don't, if your students don't have or your child doesn't have a private space,
Mm-hmm.
you know, set up time so that they do, right? If it's on the kitchen table, or if they're sharing a room, it's like, okay, divide up the time between the kids who are sharing the room so that they have the dedicated time to do the work,
Mm-hmm.
right? Look into services and programs in the community. If you're having financial difficulty paying for faster internet and things like that, look into those programs, and then see what the school district is doing to supplement that, and then pressure the school district. It's like, hey, this is who you're serving, right?
So when you
School
say, I'm
board.
going to stop
Mhm.
you. When you say
Yeah.
pressure the school district,
Hmm.
because there's a lot of people who have no idea. All right, well, who do I go to within the school
Right.
district? How do I
Right.
go about finding out
Right.
who that is?
So we all vote for our school boards, right? In our respective communities. So
Mm-hmm.
find out who those people are, right? Friend them on Facebook. Like go to the school board meetings, if you, and talk to other parents, right? And I get it. My parents were involved in PTA either. It was hard to get them to go to the Christmas pageant, right? And it's just kind of like, and part of that is also because of being immigrants. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh well, I have to work, right? So figuring out how to have those dialogues and those conversations, even in those moments where like I feel like I can't, right? Because I have this, and this going on, right? And really kind of figuring out what that needs to look like, not necessarily just for yourself, but for your kid, right? And for your students. On the district level, know who you're voting for, right? Because I know a lot of us go, and I'm guilty of this too. Going
Mm-hmm.
into our into the voting booth, it's like, okay, I like that name. I guess not knowing who they are at all, right? Not knowing their perspectives, their policies. So do the homework of that. And what would be fascinating is doing that with your kids, right? And it's like, hey, I'm going to be voting for school board. I'm going to read out to you what these people stand for. You tell me
Ah,
who you think would represent you as a student best,
I like
right?
that.
And then
And you're getting
bring
them civically engaged early on.
exactly bring them to school board meetings. I know they can be hella long and boring. I saw this one, I think it was, I want to say it was in Alabama. It was fascinating. There was this guy who basically called out one of the school board members who was doing online shopping. Did you see that
No.
that story? I was just like, oh. And the discussion was around whether or not they should rename Robert E. Lee High School, which they're now saying that they should rename after John Lewis, right? But it was fascinating because the man who was speaking, he was like, these are the things that we need to talk to, but we got so and so over here who's online shopping. You guys are not paying attention. I was like,
Yeah.
ooh, yes,
Got to
right?
speak truth to power.
Yeah, and I was just like, this. See, these are the things that I know that caught national attention, but things like that should be happening we need to hold folks accountable, right? So voting, if you're even so in your case, right? Even it's that question of, well, my kids aren't even in school anymore. What's my stake, right?
Right.
Well, the stake is that you're still a citizen, and that these kids, right, these representatives are going to impact the kids who are going to be part of this discussion, the civic discussion at the age of 18. And you want to make sure that the people who are in power now are putting in policies that will positively impact our students, and not just look at the bottom line, right? I mean, if we think about the just the how the arts and music and all of these things that have been taken away from our
Mm-hmm.
education system, right? And those are the things that really got folks into that I am a learner versus I am a student. Because in those spaces, it's like, this made me feel like my voice was heard, right? And it's, who are the folks who are supporting things like that? Because it's not just about math and English. It's not just about science and tech.
I
You
agree.
know, that's that. It can be transformational, but the way in which it's being kind of fed, arguably, can be seen as transactional. And that folks are telling them, well, you should do this because it's going to be helpful for you in getting this really cush job. And it's not about that.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, so home, local, yeah, and we'll see who becomes the next Department of Education secretary, depending
But
upon what happens in November. So yeah.
I like though multiple times though that you have talked about starting at home.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times that parents put way too much pressure on the teachers to help raise their children and instill things. And so I truly do believe that, it does have to start at home.
Yeah. And I think but there are some parents who are just like, well, I don't have this knowledge. Right. And I get that, particularly if if you come from a English as a second language home, if you're coming from a home that is where college and education hasn't been a value, right, that has been, propped up, that all these different things. So immigrant families feel like, I don't know this history. I don't know how this works as a whole. So that's completely understandable. But yeah, it's those parent teacher nights become far more important, right? And then it becomes a conversation online and, phone calls and things like that. So educators across the board are doing so much more work than people realize. And let's be honest, so many of us don't get compensated in the same way. Right? I saw something funny. It's like teachers should be paid $1 million a day. I'm just like, maybe not all of them, but there should be a commitment to education as a whole, and to saying that it is valuable in a very meaningful way. Not this just like, oh yeah, we value education. Like, no, do you really? So, sorry, I kind of went off.
No, I definitely think that teachers should be paid a whole lot more. I think that there should be tremendously more resources. I mean, I can start talking about how there's how there's such a huge law enforcement presence now in schools, and how maybe that money could be allocated to elsewhere.
Yes.
That's a whole nother thing to unpack.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if we can all start to be more civically engaged, more involved, go to these meetings, be involved, write our congressmen and our senators, and even if you can't be there, at least write them, message them. They're all on social media now, and and hit them up. Yeah, and just collectively let our voices be heard.
Right.
Slowly but surely, hopefully there'll be some changes. But I think that it's going to be very interesting to see what is going to happen, now that we're dealing with COVID and schools opening back up.
Yeah.
I think that, the timing of it, and then we're going to be going right into flu season, the normal flu season right after that. It would not shock me if, we're spending, October, November, the whole nation shut down. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm afraid for the students. Absolutely. But I'm also afraid for the teachers, the paraprofessionals, the office workers, the administration, the janitors, the librarians, who are all going to have to go back too. Right. And I think people, it really angers me when people are saying, oh, teachers are just being lazy. It's like, no. Like there are people who have comorbidity issues, right? There's a reason why we have an aging teaching population, because we have devalued that career path, right? And we're not thinking about, okay, yeah, so you don't have COVID, that's great, but what if your kid gets it? And the way in which coronavirus has been presenting in children is far more terrifying. Then if we think about the long-term effects, right, that they've been discussing, I'm just like, okay, so a kid gets it, they recover, but what other issues are they going to have for the rest of their lives?
Yeah, no one's talking about that.
No one's talking about that, right? It's like, okay, so you're willing to be, and is it because of your frustration of being with your kid 24/7? I don't have children. I will say that I do not have children, but I'm also kind of like, so you're willing to risk the life of your child, right? And I'm not just saying life and death. I'm talking about the long game of getting into their 20s, their 30s. We don't know what this is going to do for folks in terms of like reproduction. Will they be able to have kids? Is this going to impact that? It's like, all of these different things. And I let's be honest, kids, we might tell them 6 feet apart, but they're kids. They'd be like, my friend, hug. Right? Let's go play dodgeball. It's like, but no.
It's not going to happen.
Right. And I get it. This is not the way kids under the age of 18, developmentally, this is not the best way for them to be learning. I absolutely agree. But we can look at this moment in time as this is what we had to sacrifice to ensure the health of our entire community, the United States community, so that we can all go back in a more healthy way, right? It's not about money, This is about our lives. So it's lots of things.
Well, shoot, I love that. I think we'll end on that note.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me.
My mind is blown because I literally, I don't even want to be selfish. I literally could talk to you and just pick your brain all day long. I respect the fact that, I mean, you're an educator. You understand history. You understand the impact that history has on what we've got going on right now. And I just think that there are far too many people who are willfully ignorant. I actually read more now than I did when I was in college. Like I've been going nuts. I've been making Jeff Bezos rich, me and probably everyone else, but he's already been rich.
I think I've bought like 10 or 20 books since we've gone into COVID, and don't ask me if I've read them yet. like there's so many things, right? But that's what I'm saying. It's like you continue to learn. Right? You're continuing to ask those questions. And the folks who are being willfully ignorant are not.